coming up today.
You know, when I first sort of entered into all of this, I was working at Whole Foods. I was literally bagging groceries at the Whole Foods in Oakland, California. 23 years old. I had really nothing going on. And here we are over a decade later, and it's a trip.
This is Radio Juxtapoz.
We live in an age where a seemingly endless supply of art can be digitally consumed at any chosen moment. With so many traditional spaces closed throughout the pandemic, for many of us, scrolling through our phones was the only access we've had to art. So where does this leave a physical gallery space in an increasingly digital world? With the opening of his fourth real-world gallery space, we couldn't think of a better person to discuss this and much more than Ken Harman Hashimoto. The American-Japanese gallerist has become a firm favourite in emerging contemporary circles through his galleries Spoke Art and the more recent endeavour Hashimoto Contemporary. Welcome back to Radio Juxtapoz, your relatively irregular home for conversations and insights into the art world from those that shape it. My name is Doug Gillen, and today both Evan Preco and myself join Ken over Zoom from his flat in New York. Sorry, apartment. His apartment in New York. We had a little bit of a hiatus over the summer, but we are well and truly back in the mix with the podcast now. If there are any subjects you would like us to tackle, or any guests that you would love to hear from, then let us know in the comments section of wherever you're listening in from. To kick things off, Evan, Ken and myself tried to piece together a slightly hazy night running about New York just as the pandemic started to kick off. Enjoy the show.
This is a great way to start the podcast. For some reason, all of us stupidly, during Armory Week of March 2020, in the height of when COVID was spreading around New York, we all decided to go to a crowded ass bar in Brooklyn.
First of all, this was, I want to say like 3 days before everything shut down. We had no idea. We didn't know yet. It was still this like abstract concept that night and that time. But yes. It was you, me, Mike, Jen. We went to Moe's. Is that right? In Fort Greene?
I remember.
Ken, you've been doing this now. Is this the 10-year anniversary of Hashimoto?
No, this is the 8th anniversary of Hashimoto. The 11th anniversary of Spoke. And it was 2000, like my 13th anniversary as like an art world person.
You just opened up Los Angeles with Hashimoto. Congratulations. It's amazing. You started in San Francisco. You went to New York. What was it like 13 years ago when you started compared to right now?
Well, I don't really get much time to reflect.
No, you don't. That we're going to make you reflect today.
But if I had a spare 5 minutes to like sit down and not have to be busy, 13 years ago, when I first sort of entered into all of this, I was working at Whole Foods. I was literally bagging groceries at the Whole Foods in Oakland, California. 23 years old. I had really nothing going on. Here we are over a decade later, and it's a trip, man. It's been a total wild ride, and a lot of just like amazing, wonderful like coincidences and lucky sort of turns of fate. And and here we are. But it's been a wild ride.
I think it's very important for people to understand San Francisco Bay Area 13 years ago still had. It still does have it, but it was less techie then than it is now, obviously. There was something still germinating and happening where like small things could still happen. I can't remember what the first thing that you did was, because we kind of came up at the same time.
Sure. Well, going back to the first thing, the Bay was so different then than it is today. And of course it was different before I showed up in whatever 06, 07. And it was obviously much different for the people who were there before me. It's funny. I was actually having a conversation with an artist friend pretty recently, and he's a little bit older than us. He's like in his early 40s. We were talking and it was like, for that 21-year-old kid graduating from SFAI, CCA, the Art Academy, whatever, for that 21-year-old kid graduating, like me, like I'm the old guy. You know what I mean? I'm like that previous generation, and all of my artist friends who are in our age are as well. And, like Juxtapoz, like how old is Juxtapoz? Like
We're turning 28.
28. For these kids and, they're not children, but for these kids graduating school right now, Juxtapoz has always existed, right? This is, like for them, it's not, I think it's a great magazine. I think that you've done a great job of staying on top of things and, keeping your finger on the pulse.
We take compliments here. Yes.
But, for these kids, it's always been around. And for these kids, I've always been around. I started my galleries when they were in junior high. And, it's so interesting to look back to that time, to, the mid 2000s when, so for example, like if I'm talking to a younger person today and I mention White Walls Gallery, they have no idea what I'm talking about. They they've never even heard of it. They don't know anything about the drama. They know nothing. And that's because similarly, I don't know anything about those galleries that were around in San Francisco in 1987. Those galleries that came and went over the years, those artists that came and went over the years. I don't know who those spaces were or what their deal was. And it's sort of a trip to know that we're not young anymore.
Well, no, Ken, I think what's interesting here is the concept of longevity in the art world. It's difficult to have longevity, and it's also difficult to maintain a pulse and a desire to maintain a pulse.
Sure.
I think what you probably have seen over your time is that you've had to change. And I think people don't understand that gallerists have to work really hard at keeping things sort of going.
No, absolutely. And I think that, when you consider, artists and galleries are two sides of the same coin, right? And much as an artist should evolve their practice and should evolve their work, the work that, if you're an artist and you're listening to this right now, the artwork that you're making 10 years from now hopefully looks different than the artwork that you're making today. If it doesn't, either you're incredibly successful and you are making a lot of money, or it's time to consider switching things up. And galleries are the same way. Curators are the same way. And, also we grow as people, our tastes change. And it's sort of funny because when I consider other creative things that I love, right? So for example, music, it is so hard to sit down and force myself to listen to new music, because if I could have my way, I would only listen to mid 90s New York, hip hop and late 90s alternative rock, and to sit down and be like, oh yeah, this is what the kids are listening to. I want to find out what that is and get into that. That's really tough.
Especially when you listen to some of the shit that they're making now.
Don't get me started. But yeah, and art's the same way. And luckily it's a lot easier with art for whatever reason. We do have to grow. And, I will say that that's one of the sort of the nice things about having sort of a bigger gallery. And I'm by no means big, but, I have, 9 full-time employees, and those employees are they help inform what the gallery is and where it's going. And, they provide a fresh perspective. And, I think that if you look at a lot of galleries that are single owner galleries and smaller operations, they tend to sort of get stuck into the thing that they came up with, which makes a lot of sense. If it were just me and just my gallery, the programming would be very different. But I have all of these voices and all of these younger voices who help sort of inform where we're going.
Was that hard to give up a little bit of curatorial power?
Yes and no. I mean, it absolutely can be, and I'm an only child. So I'm used to things being my way, and I get all the Christmas gifts and, all of that. So yeah, it is difficult, but you need to trust your employees. And if you can't trust your employees, that probably means that you need new employees, or there's something wrong with you. Right. And I know, for example, with Jux, you have a lot of freedom, I feel with the magazine, right?
Yeah.
There's an awkward silence there.
No. But I know what you're getting at this. I also have a wonderful group of writers who suggest things, and we listen, and that's how the magazine can exist.
For sure. And if the magazine were just, what does Gwen like? If the magazine was just what does Evan like or what does Mike like? The magazine would be very different. But you need all of these voices. And you need good voices. You need people who do have their finger on the pulse and who can present alternating ideas and perspectives and viewpoints. And I think that the magazine is successful because of that. And I think that my galleries are successful because of that.
If you look at the model of a gallery from 10 years ago when you first came in to how it shapes now, what's the biggest difference between then to now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the easy answer is the internet and social media, right? Like online sales alone. When we started, online sales were how we...
Well, no, I was going to say, Ken, when you say when we started, can you clarify what that means? Because there's many different entities of what your career has been. So when you say spoke art, or when you say, like, what would you say?
Okay. So that's a bigger question. And the answer is that, when I say we, I mean me, my artists, my staff, like all of us, right? I don't have a group of partners. I don't have, a committee, right? But it's a group effort, right? I'm dependent on my artists. My artists are dependent on me. I wouldn't be able to do this without them. And I don't want to leave them out of this conversation. Yep. From a business perspective, we means, Spoke Art Gallery, Hashimoto Contemporary, Paragon Books, the People's Print Shop, Recess, our warehouse in Berkeley, and our 4 gallery locations. Because all of these things are interconnected. They're all in many ways the same thing.
Yeah. That's why I wanted to make sure you clarified that for everybody.
Obviously, Instagram, we were lucky, right? When my galleries came up, that was about that time, maybe even pre-Instagram. But, if you look at today, it's all, NFTs, will they be around 10 years from now? I don't know. You want to talk about changes in the art world. I mean, just the impact NFTs have had on, the art world financially speaking this year alone. I mean, it's been insane. And you guys had Beeple on, I know, a few episodes ago. So you know what's up.
There's something about the fact that you were able to, with Spoke Art, you were able to create a buzz with the themed show.
For sure.
What happened with the Wes Anderson theme shows? Because that seemed to have just took off and created a whole buzz that helped you. I kind of feel like helped move you probably financially into a place where you could do the other things you wanted to do.
Mm-hmm. Our first Wes Anderson show was Halloween weekend 2010. And it was my second show ever. I had no idea what I was doing. I really didn't. And I made a lot of mistakes, but I learned a lot of really important things. And
we'll get back to that.
And that show came up because at the time I was waiting tables at a pizza restaurant in Oakland. And we were screening some films in the back patio area. And I forget who it was, maybe Phil, but one of like the cooks who like was involved, they had this idea like, oh, let's do a night and call it Bad Dads, and we'll show Empire Strikes Back. We'll show National Lampoon's, any of them, right? We'll show whatever. And as that conversation was happening, I was like, oh, well, like, why don't we show like a Wes Anderson movie? Because this one qualifies, Royal Tenenbaums is a Bad Dad movie. And then I was like, oh, wait, but so is Life Aquatic. Oh, wait, so is Fantastic Mr. Fox. Oh, wait, so's Rushmore, right? And I was like, oh, well, that's actually sort of interesting. There's this common theme. And I was looking for an art show idea. I wanted to put on a second show. I'd already done a first show. I was like, okay, cool. I'm just going to, hey, can I borrow this Bad Dad's name? And I'm just going to run with this and put together this Wes Anderson themed art show. Thanks, here we go. And we did it, and it was amazing. Hundreds of people showed up in costume. It was a costume party. It did really well financially. It did really well, from a marketing perspective. And it became one of our flagship shows for a really, really, really long time. In 2007, maybe, we did a New York version. Wes Anderson came to that, which was amazing. He brought Jason Schwartzman with him, which, it was really, it was great. We did a book. We released a Bad Dads book. Wes Anderson wrote the preface to the book. It's really just been this amazing adventure, and it started on a whim.
We kind of talked about this. You've mentioned it a couple of times, this idea that you were completely disconnected to the art world. And I think we're missing a this catalyst moment. What was it that took you away from working in Whole Foods, within one show or within a couple of years, you're now, bringing in Wes Anderson to your gallery. So tell me about that. How did that kind of come together?
Yeah. So my first gallery experience, like my first moment in a gallery, especially in this world, was in January 2009. And I was in Washington, D.C. for Obama's inauguration. As a early 20s Whole Foods grocery bagger, I could not afford to stay at a hotel because hotels are $1,000 a night in D.C., inauguration. I'm going to DC for this inauguration. I could barely afford the plane ticket, right? But I need a place to stay. And so I hit up this guy I know, Yossi Sargent, who had put together this art show called Manifest Hope in Georgetown. And it was produced by MoveOn.org and Shepard Fairey. And it was this big, social justice art show. And I hit up Yossi and I'm like, hey man, I'm coming to DC. Do you have any recommendations on where I could stay? And Yossi so kindly says that I could sleep in the gallery. And so for a week, I live in this hidden from the public, in this little storeroom in the back of this gallery with a handful of artists who were part of the show and also didn't have a place to stay. And we just we lived in this gallery for a week. And, I remember it's 2 a.m. and Tristan Neaton's fixed gear bicycle that Trusto Corp had designed for this show was in this show. And we're drunkenly riding it around this gallery, surrounded by, incredibly expensive art and just getting into all these fun hijinks. But that was my first gallery experience. And to be able to live and work in that space during that time, I got to see how do shows come together? How are they installed? How do sales happen? What are all of the behind the scenes things that your average, gallery goer doesn't get to see? And in many ways, I think that sort of planted the idea in my mind that, hey, this could be something that I do one day. This could be something if these guys can do it, yeah, I can do this too.
Was there kind of a DIY camaraderie in there at that time where it didn't feel quite as oiled perhaps as sometimes it does?
100%, because this was a pop-up show, right? And it was a pop-up show not being put on by a professional gallery organization. MoveOn.org is not a gallery, right? So they were figuring it out in front of me and I was watching them figure it out. Yeah. And I'm still figuring it out, 10 years later.
Were you paying attention to stuff that was happening in the Bay Area and the art scene at that time? Or was this just something that you witnessed was happening? You're like, oh my God, there's an energy here and I really, really want to be part of this.
09, 08, this was before I started working for High Fructose. This was years before. And so 06, 07, I moved to Oakland from Western Massachusetts. I get a job at Whole Foods because I need a job. I've always needed a job. I have worked since I was 14. I've done every shitty job you can name. I've done fast food. I've done it all. And I've never not worked as an adult because I've never had the luxury of being able to afford to not work as an adult. When I moved to Oakland in 06, I'm working at Whole Foods. 07, 08 rolls around and I noticed that all of my favorite artists, the people who I was collecting, who I was following, who I loved, Shepard Fairey, Ron English, David Cho, all of these guys are making campaign artwork for this unknown junior senator from Chicago by the name of Barack Obama. And that strikes me as so interesting because by definition, street artists and graffiti artists are anti-establishment, right? That's what they do. Why would they support the establishment? And alternatively, why would the establishment accept their support? Because these guys are criminals, right, in the eyes of the law. And politicians don't publicly accept support from criminals, right? So I thought that this was a really interesting moment. And I started a blog, a .blogspot.com situation in 08. And it was just me exploring this idea and documenting this moment. I would work Whole Foods for 8 hours and I would come home and for free. I made no money doing this. I would spend a couple hours every day looking up art on Flickr, finding some kid who put up a mural in Philadelphia, finding a person on Etsy who was making stenciled signs, going out with a Bay Area artist at night and documenting them as they put up wheat pastes, interviewing my favorite artists via email. And so I had this blog spot, and it was just something that I did to keep me busy and to keep me filled creatively. I certainly didn't do it for the money. I didn't make any money. And it just sort of took off. One day, the Wall Street Journal contacts me because they're doing an article on Obama art. And I'm the main person to talk to about that. So the Wall Street Journal interviews me, front page, Sunday arts and culture section. You know, I'm 22 years old. I'm bagging groceries at Whole Foods. This is like such a trip. From there, MSNBC reads the Wall Street Journal thing. So MSNBC calls me and they say, hey, we want to interview you live on national television. I'm like, what? Okay. So I go to Whole Foods and I tell them I can't work that weekend, and I hop on a plane and I go to, and like, that's the craziest, most scariest thing I've ever done. Like, live television is a trip, man. It really is. You're wearing all this makeup.
Oh, you got the makeup as well.
Oh yeah. I looked real pretty. Yeah, it was, I would probably never do that one again. Funnily enough, Yossi had seen me on TV, and that's how he and I then connected. Yeah, so like that moment and like the realization that something was happening and that someone needed to document it and someone needed to record it. And I was bored and had nothing else going on, and I needed some sort of outlet at the time. You know, yeah, all of those things sort of coalesce together, and it's because of that we're sitting here today. So, you know, thanks, Obama.
I think there's something really nice about what you're saying there. And I've noticed this, you know, just through my experience of working in the art world, having kind of come through a relatively similar path with no outside experience, certainly no formal training. And it is that idea of just, if you just put stuff out there and you say that, you know, you're documenting this thing, you can assert yourself as this sudden position of like authority within street art. And I think we see this, or within contemporary art. It's interesting how that blog or that Instagram account, that can be the thing that suddenly validates you, where you create this sense of like authority within it, where you don't necessarily need the Wall Street Journal or you need something else. You can just go out and say these things, and then, you know, within, you know, the blink of an eye, you can suddenly be regarded as an authority figure within a culture. And I think that's such a really important, you know, way of looking at it. If you're sitting as an outsider just now listening to this, like, hey, I see this guy who's got this gallery and he's got this stuff. It's like, you know, how can I have that? And that's it. It's literally just, you understand this scene, you understand these things, and then people will start to maybe buy into it a little bit and believe that.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think it's all about doing what you got to do and being able and willing to make the sacrifices that you need to make. You know, I still don't really make money, but like, I did not make money for many, many years doing this. And I had to work multiple jobs in order to do this. And those were the sacrifices that I had to make. And I know a lot of artists, for example, especially early on in their careers, who have to make sacrifices to get where they're at today. In regards to you and you guys, how did you guys meet? How does
Oh shit.
Oh man.
What's he's doing his high fructose, is he?
You know, and again, this goes through street art. Doug and I used to go to the New Art Festival in Stavanger, Norway. Doug was doing, I guess, Doug, you were kind of doing the documentary each year for the festival, and Doug had to interview me because I was going every year, and I was one of the people who would give a talk, and I was kind of like, you know, covering it for Juxtapoz, and we just kind of had similar social skills.
Awkward.
No, what do we? No, we just had a similar passion for certain parts of how this culture was going and just how the art world was, and we sort of figured that if we could kind of combine powers and talk about it, it would be kind of fun to do.
And then Radio Jux came out of that realization.
I think it was like the third. Maybe we had talked about it. We the first year was get to know you time, and then I think the second time we started talking about it, and then the third one was like, okay, cool, we got to do this. And it was that sort of like 2 a.m, just standing there, just, what are we gonna call this? Juxtapoz Radio? No, Radio Juxtapoz. Okay, let's do that. And that was it. And then we just kind of took it from there, and it was like, oh, okay, this kind of makes sense, and it gives us a chance, you know, a reason to kind of keep talking, but a chance to talk about the shit that we, you know, that we don't get to talk about the other 11 months of the year where we're not at a festival together, you know?
Yeah, and I think also it comes to this. I think this conversation goes full circle because all three of us came into the art world from alternative ways. We were not all art school kids. We were not all people who were, gifted this wonderful opportunity to the art world is all for you. It's just not like that. And I think having discussions about how the art world is outside of that vernacular was I thought really important to have.
It's always been important for us here on Radio Juxtapoz that we try to go beyond this top layer of the art world and dig into the mechanics of how it functions in an attempt to show you, the listener, that you don't have to be a super talented artist to be able to build yourself a career in this scene. New avenues and access points are constantly appearing, and just putting yourself out there seems like half the battle. If there's more areas of this that you'd like us to explore, then please do just let us know and we'll see if we can wave our magic mic stands over it. Coming up in the second half of the podcast today, we discuss the role of the gallery, the art world's beef with cause, and Ken's thoughts on cancel culture. Stay locked. For you, Ken, was it street art that was interesting you at that time when you were first kind of coming into it, or was it less about the street part and more about just young contemporary, or what was it then? And I'm interested to see how, because I see there's maybe similarities in how that taste has started to kind of mature and grow much the same way that I feel like Juxtapoz has.
Sure. So yeah, I'm 38, right? So my generation came up with, Shepard Fairey, Banksy, Swoon. These were artists who in my, early 20s, late teens were new, were exciting. They were fresh. This was the answer to the previous generation. And so that's the environment I came up in. And I remember in, 04, 05, taking photos of street art and submitting it to Worcester Collective and seeing them publish my photos and being like, wow, that's so cool. That was, my formative years. But, even before that, I grew up in a very creative household, and my mother, was never an artist, but she always loved to make art, and she always made art. And she always took me to museums. I was very, very fortunate in that. I don't know how a single mother with a bratty ass kid like me managed to afford a annual membership at LACMA, but somehow she thought that was important, and that was a sacrifice that she made, and we would go regularly. And I remember being in high school, and my mom and I went to the LA MoCA, and there was a Gordon Matta Clark exhibition. And that thing blew my fucking mind. I mean, it really did. I was like, holy shit, this contemporary art opened up for me. And then in high school, we studied, Christo, studying Christo in high school was oh, wow, this is so cool, So I think that I was lucky in that, my generation, right place, right time, but also I happen to have a good foundational education as well. And then, of course, now, because I have, employees with great taste, they're showing me sort of the new things that are coming out that I didn't grow up with. So that's pretty exciting, too.
What changed for you where you thought that, or that you allowed you to start Hashimoto Contemporary after the success? I mean, I don't want to say financial success because I don't want to get into your finances, but the popularity of spoke art allowed you or afforded you the opportunity to do Hashimoto Contemporary. They're two completely different programs, which is, I think, so cool. Hashimoto Contemporary, you were able to change a direction and now have been able to move that to 3 different locations. What confidence did you have in order to start that and change directions?
Yeah, so it was a little bit of luck. Spoke Art is on Sutter Street in San Francisco, close to Union Square. And 3 doors down from Spoke Art was Jessica Silverman's original location. And when she decamped to a larger space, I guess in 2013 or 2014.
Sounds right. Yeah.
This a pre-built gallery space a couple doors down from me opened up. As a curator and as a gallerist, one of the frustrating things about having a gallery is that you are in many ways tied down to a specific aesthetic, a specific group of artists, a specific group of collectors. And while that's very fulfilling, that's like, I don't know, like I like all movies, like I would, put on a Criterion film or an A24 film, or put on, some stupid blockbuster, that's going to make me laugh. Like I like it all. And to only say, hey, I'm only going to show pop culture, I'm only going to show, illustration, that leaves so much off the table that I can't do that. Much like I can't only watch 90s comedies. I mean, they're great, but give me something else every now and again. Hashimoto was an answer to that, was my opportunity to say, hey, I'm also interested in other things, and this is my chance to be able to show those things. And because the spaces were next door, it was easy to manage, because the spaces aren't large, they were affordable. So I got pretty lucky, but to be frank, it was also a desire to do different things. And it's so weird sometimes, like especially interfacing with collectors, where it's like, man, you only collect one thing? Like, why? That's like only eating Italian food. Like, I love Italian food, but come on, man. Like, right. I can't live without sushi. What's wrong with you?
I think it's also, for people who don't quite know where your galleries are in San Francisco, that has been a hub in the city for a long time, because that's where the 3 Huff locations were back in the day. And just that energy on that block was always so strong. So when you open up those spaces, there's like, oh, that totally makes sense. I mean, there's like good mojo in those spaces.
I grew up a sneakerhead again. That's just my generation. And I had all the rare dunks back in the day. And, now that I'm going to be 40, I don't know.
What I was trying to get to is like that part of the culture is really, really important as an entryway for a lot of our generation getting into the art world.
Absolutely.
Those collaborations that Nike SB was doing with artists was such a big deal. Yeah, Futura, Jeremy Fish, like all these people, like such a big deal at the time that, I mean, it afforded me an opportunity to learn about these people too before I ever worked at Juxtapoz. So I think there's something about that collector mentality that I think the art establishment doesn't give enough credit to, is that there is something about being a fan of an artist and actually sitting in line for something that is very special. And I feel like even recently seeing all this criticism about cause, I keep thinking to myself, but you can't criticize the kid who wants to sit in line and really, really wants to meet somebody or wants to meet their hero. Like, I just feel like that's the kind of thing that it got me into art. So I hate seeing criticism of it sometimes.
I think that I
want to get Doug a little riled up just then.
I'm saying nothing.
No, it's more so just the idea that a lot of us enter the art world through collector culture and how that's still special, I think.
Well, for example, we're doing Complex Con in November, and like that's really the perfect example of that. And 3 years ago, I was in Chicago, and I go to the Art Institute, and I'm walking around, and I overhear this girl, I don't know, 15-year-old, 16-year-old girl, and she's with her family, and she's standing in front of a Takashi Murakami painting. And she literally says out loud, oh, he did the cover art to my favorite album. This is that artist. And she doesn't even know his name. She has to go, oh, yeah, to Takashi. Yeah, he did. And like that's important. And you can hate on cause, right? And I get, okay. But what you're hating on, a lot, especially like, the editorials that I'm reading regarding, cause and his success and the Brooklyn Museum show, a lot of that hate is because of his success. If he wasn't successful, nobody would care. And people see that success and they say, oh, well, that success should have gone to someone else, someone more deserving. And they're not necessarily wrong, but to be fair, I think a valid counter question is, well, what does this artist do with their success, right? And if you do look at cause, you see that he has opened up contemporary art to an entire generation of people who maybe wouldn't have cared about it. How many people went to that Brooklyn Museum show and for them it was their first museum show? How many of them have gone to one of his shows and it was their first gallery show? I remember going to my first Shepherd show at White Walls, right? I remember, Takashi, again, that example, right? How many people come to Complex Con because of that? Or look at Kaz's personal collection, right? Yeah, I mean, he's very vocal about what he collects and why he collects. And if you look at his Instagram, you see that he's collected. He has a great eye and a very well curated collection. And he uses his platform to promote these artists who aren't getting recognition. And that's important. And Takashi does the same thing with his spaces, with his events, and so, yeah, you can be mad at their success, but to be frank, they're probably doing more than you are.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting here is that you have been able to do these two kind of brands in a way where, like, Spoke Art speaks a lot to collector culture and Hashimoto speaks to kind of contemporary art. And so the reason why I think it's important that you talk about like that, because you are kind of dealing with two different audiences. Sure,
absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes there's crossover.
I think for me in that side, it's the idea that it fails to challenge it just becomes so consumer driven. And I think this is where I start to detach, especially if you look at something that came from protest on the streets. If you look at someone doing ad takeovers in the street, and then suddenly it just becomes this complete embodiment of empty capitalism, like just buy this, bigger numbers, shinier things, bigger projects. It doesn't matter if it's this canvas or this canvas, all you're feeling is aesthetic and this, desire, hypebeast culture. And it kind of comes down to that. And I think that's where that detachment for me starts to kick in. And this is why whenever I think about Banksy, I just think, we could be in a position where Supreme have dropped girl with balloon t-shirts left, right and center, or one-off necklaces, and they would be going for however much, but he's never done that. And that's really that point at which these two ideologies completely split. You've got one which is completely feeding into the machine of capitalism, which, as far as we are all concerned, is completely broken, and the other one that tries to poke and challenge it while still kind of feeding into this machine of capitalism, because he still sits there and he's still getting his numbers. And I think it's that point where I start to veer off. I have nothing but respect, and everything that you said there about Cause I completely agree with. I think he does do a lot. He certainly does a lot more than I do for putting artists on pedestals and opening up. He employs people. I get all that, but when you come down and boil it down to just this kind of aesthetics and numbers, then we lose the heart, the message, and the motivations that every single one of these artists came from at the start. When you talk about street culture, street art, that's where it was born from, as a protest.
Yeah, but you can say the same about contemporary art too, right? I mean, you can say the same thing about your Damien Hirsts and your Jeff Koons. And
I mean, they definitely fit into that.
It didn't necessarily come from, maybe now that Hirst just did
fucking losing his mind.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're absolutely right. And it is unfortunate. And, but it's also part of how it goes. And, I think that you can apply this frustration to any creative field. I think that you can look at who's number one on the Billboard charts, and are they really the best musician out there? The answer is going to be no. What's the number one blockbuster movie in America? Is it the best movie in America? Probably not.
Well, I think also this goes to the conversation of we're at such a unique time for whatever it is that we call the art world. Is it at its apex? Is it at the complete height? Are we just at the beginning of it? I mean, this year alone, with the NFTs and with record auction prices, and it just seems like, and there's so many artists, there's so many galleries, there's so much stuff. Like, we're at a very unique time where there's a lot. And Ken, and it's interesting because you opened up Los Angeles this year. You are at this point making another big leap, and you have to fill another gallery 12 times a year, 10 times a year, however many times you do it. Is there a sense that, like, you're seeing so much going on and you feel like this is the moment for you, or is it just that you've always wanted to be in Los Angeles and Los Angeles is a cool place to be?
I grew up outside of Los Angeles. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley. So for me, having a place closer to home and closer to my mom, I mean, that's nice. Opening a gallery in Los Angeles, I didn't open a gallery in Los Angeles because I like the added overhead, or, a huge space in Culver City is very expensive. Bringing on, new employees and hiring new people is very expensive, right? It's very stressful. The reason that we've opened New York, and the reason that we opened LA, and the reason that we opened New York a few years ago, was because our artists needed these opportunities. And being originally a Bay Area gallery, being in San Francisco for a few years, when we started, I couldn't help but notice that my artists weren't showing in New York City, right? There wasn't, it was very difficult, and it still is to some degree for West Coast artists to show on the East Coast. There are differences in the markets. The New York market is different from the California market. Opening a New York space was so that our artists could show in New York, especially at the time in which we opened. The landscape has changed from where it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So the galleries that my artists could have shown at were slowly, year after year, were disappearing. And opening a New York space was important to me so that my artists could have those opportunities. And in LA, we have a lot of, there's a lot more overlap with LA galleries. And that's actually been a different type of discussion in which I've had to go to galleries and say, like, hey, I'm opening a space in Los Angeles. We share this artist. How are we going to figure this out? What can we do to ensure that I don't step on your toes? You'll show them in LA, I'll show them in New York. Great, easy, right? But those are conversations that have to be had. But at the same time, for many of my artists, they don't have an LA space and they don't have an LA gallery. And being able to give my artists opportunities, and as many opportunities as I can, that's my job. That's literally my job. So I'm just doing my job, man.
With the way that everything has kind of been in the last 2 years, and even before that, there is, as you've said, the biggest change was this digital space. How important is a physical space? And I'm asking this as you just opening another space. So there must be a reason that you keep wanting to have this physical space where people can go in and see the art. How important is that? And will it always be as important as it is today?
If I were a smart man, I would not have any spaces. I would not have a retail brick and mortar gallery space. What I would do is I would do pop-up shows in rental spaces. I would charge a door cover. I would make $20 to $40 a person coming in through the door. And I would get thousands, tens of thousands of people to come to my shows, which I can do. And I would sell the artwork on top, and I would make motherfucking money. And I would not have the day-to-day overhead of paying rent and being locked into a lease and having to maintain full-time employees or a large group of full-time employees. That's what I would do if I were smart. And to the people who do that, good for you. I love to see that success. I really, really do.
There's some people taking notes right now, just fucking scribbling like, what was that? What was that, 20 to 40?
And, seriously, it's amazing. It's awesome. And it does so much. It does so much for the artists. It does so much for the fans. It really is important. And then, of course, there's the immersive Van Gogh things or whatever. And, there's a place for that too, right? That also brings people into the art world.
I think it's unfair they get shit on. I think it's so pretentious to shit on that. They're fucking amazing. You smoke a zoot and then walk into one of those things. It's amazing. I love it.
Yeah, I went to Team Lab in Tokyo a few years ago. It blew my mind.
Hold on a second. Team Lab is different than...
Agreed. But we wouldn't have immersive Van Gogh if we didn't have Team Lab, right? Someone went to one of those and said, I can do that too.
This will get me on the art of Banksy bullshit here in a second. I'm just going to fucking...
I haven't been. I refuse to.
I think that's where I draw my line.
Doug, you're going to be really hyped. I'm writing an essay about how much I fucking hate those things and just how I think it's destroying one of the special things we have in the culture.
Yes.
I can't wait to publish it.
I love it.
Yeah. Like I'm saying, these models are financially much smarter and very 2.0. They're very much of the moment. And it's not the antiquated old school gallery system, which has been around forever and is, to be frank, in many ways out of date. But I do think it's important that physical galleries do exist because A, they're open 5 days a week. B, they're free to go to. Mm-hmm. And that's something that's important to me because as someone who has worked at Whole Foods making $11, $12 an hour, I can't necessarily drop $50 every time I want to see art. I need to go to the museum on the free day, right? And so for contemporary art galleries or for art galleries to be open and to be free provides the community with a service that you're not going to get elsewhere, or that you only get at a museum one day a month. And if you got to work, tough shit.
Right.
So that is important. And not only is that important, but, artists need to have work seen, and they need to have work seen in person, right? I mean, you in theory don't, there's plenty of galleries out there that are online only. And again, good for you. You're probably making more money than I am if you're online only, because your overhead is much less than mine. And it's easy to sell artwork online. But your artists aren't getting work shown in person. People are only seeing that on a screen. And to me, I find that unfortunate.
Come on, let's also be honest here. It's kind of fun to have gallery shows.
It's as fun to have gallery shows as it is to actually publish a print magazine. Right? Juxtapoz could be online only, and it wouldn't be the same, because there is a segment of the population that wants a tangible physical thing in their life.
Absolutely. Even as we've even seen through the pandemic, more people want something tangible in their lives.
All of these things, they're important.
It's still exciting, though, to have an opening. Like, you have an opening tomorrow in San Francisco.
Yes. Kim Kogan. This is, I think, our third or second show with Kim. We've been working with him for a few years. It's an amazing looking exhibition. I'm so excited. Yeah, we've got an amazing lineup. And Kim, again, local artist. And these paintings need to be seen in person. You can't, like they're painterly, they're textural, you have to get a look. Seeing one of Kim's oil paintings on a screen is great, but seeing one in person is a different experience. And the artists need these experiences, and the collectors need these experiences too.
What do you think of cancel culture?
Ugh, don't even get me started. It's funny. I was just listening actually to
this. I promise this comes from somewhere.
Yeah. All right. I was just listening to the cultural appropriation episode that y'all did with Allison.
Okay.
And I mean, if you're listening now and you haven't heard this episode, you should listen to that next. But cancel culture is a valuable tool, and it's an important tool. And as long as there are people like Harvey Weinstein in the world, as long as there are people like R. Kelly in the world, we need cancel culture. We need the ability to call someone out. We need the ability to warn others. We need the ability to hold these people who are in positions of power and who abuse that power. We need the ability to rectify that and to fix that. And cancel culture allows us to do that. And it is a valuable, powerful tool. But like all powerful tools, it needs to be used sparingly. It needs to be used smartly, right? So, does the United States nuke every country that it has a problem with? No. We hear something bad about some other country. We don't just go and fucking nuke them, right? We figure this shit out and we use that as the last resort. That is the final straw. That is, that's not something that we wield, casually. And the problem with cancel culture is that it is so easy to try to call somebody out, because everyone has a voice. Everyone is on the platform. And it's so easy also to get caught up in something. It's so easy to hear one side of the story and say, oh my God, that sounds terrible. Boom, I'm now on the dog pile as well, right? And so, for example, for me personally, in the last year, because of cancel culture, because it's almost like trendy to try to to participate in this, last year, I did a print release with an artist, and it was a print release inspired by a Miyazaki film, right? Studio Ghibli, anime, Japanimation. And someone comes onto my Instagram and they say, how dare you not support Asian lives? How dare you not support Asian artists? This opportunity could have gone to an Asian artist and blah, blah, blah. And you're whitewashing this and shame on you. And first of all, if you want to talk about opportunities, I mean, that's actually a different conversation, because quote unquote opportunities are oftentimes huge financial burdens for artists. And just because you gave someone the opportunity to paint that mural, well, if that mural costs $10,000 to paint, is that really an opportunity for an artist? I don't know. But in regards to the specific situation, it's like, I'm half Japanese. And you're saying I'm white, what? And actually, if you look at this specific artist that you're calling out, she's part Japanese too. And just because she doesn't look Japanese, or just because her name's not her name doesn't sound Japanese. Well, who's the racist one now? You know what I mean? Like, it was so annoying. You know, what I did is I responded. I said, hey, listen, I'm half Japanese and the artist is part Japanese. And come to our gallery in San Francisco. In fact, hey, look, here's a Japanese artist that we literally have on view in this group show. Come check out her work. It's great. And you know what that person did? They fucking blocked me, right? They did. There was no discourse. There was no And I came respectfully. I came politely. I wanted, the opportunity to show this person, yeah, you're wrong, but hey, let's move on from this. And they blocked me. And that's so, it's so frustrating. And the difficult thing, and sort of going back to your appropriation episode, but the difficult thing for me is that we could be using our time and our energy and our resources so much better than we do, like looking. So for example, like, let's look at this Bo Stanton thing that you guys discussed already. And I don't mean to.
It's a case study now. It really is. It becomes this blueprint for the conversation. Sorry, Bo.
And again, if you haven't heard the episode, if you're listening, go back, listen to it, see what we're talking about.
Just a bit of context for you here, in case you missed the episode Ken is referring to. The artist Bo Stanton was invited to paint a mural a few years ago on the side of a school in Koreatown, LA. The mural itself featured a sunburst motif, which was a relatively common characteristic of Bo's work. However, a local group from the Korean community took offense to this sunburst, drawing comparisons with the Imperial Japanese flag. This opened up a huge debate and what I imagine to be a bit of a headache for all involved. But earlier this year, Bo was finally able to repaint the mural with the involvement of the community group, in a result which seems to have finally pleased everybody. The story itself has become a bit of a case study for community representation and involvement in public mural programs.
Okay, listen, the Japanese did a lot of fucked up shit during World War II. And as someone who is half Japanese, I've seen in person, when you go to Japan and you talk to Japanese people, or my mother who is Japanese, and she's, post World War II, she's an atom bomb survivor, right? She's very old school. And, when I ask her about what happened in Nanking, she was literally never taught this in school, right? This was not part of the curriculum. Right? What the Japanese did is horrendous and needs to be addressed. But canceling Bo Stanton doesn't do anything. That doesn't fix the problem. The problem is that the Japanese government needs to admit what they did. It needs to become part of the curriculum. There need to be apologies. There need to be some form of reparations or what have you. It has to be addressed. And again, Bo Stanton had nothing to do with that, and getting rid of his mural doesn't actually solve anything. And it is a waste of our time, of our resources, of our energy, when we could actually be, hey, you want to protest? Yeah, let's go protest in front of the Japanese embassy and talk about this. Let's not protest in front of Bo's mural. It's totally misdirected. And I understand the frustration. I understand the anger. But again, we need to learn how to harness these things in a better, more productive way, I think.
I'm trying to segue this to a lovely conclusion that's not about cancel culture. Ken, you've got 4 spaces, 2 in San Francisco, 1 in New York, 1 in LA. It's kind of been a wild ride. As we kind of have now sort of reached the point of we're going to live with COVID for a while, the world's opening up hesitantly. What is it that you are grateful for over the last 2 years?
First off, I'm grateful to my employees. I'll tell you right now, as a small business owner, COVID was difficult. It was tough. I have 4 commercial rents. I have 5 now, but I had 4 during COVID. And I got a break on my warehouse. I think they dropped my rent like $1,000, but everywhere else, I paid full price in rent for the entirety that we were shut down, and I couldn't do shows. And, I didn't want to let any of my employees go. I feel like cutting someone's hours or reducing their pay or letting them go during a pandemic is a pretty gnarly thing to do. And I didn't want to do it. And we kept our entire staff employed. 8 or 9 full-time people, and we hustled hard online to sell art and to provide our artists with opportunities, because they sure as shit needed opportunities too, especially with shows canceling and events canceling. And during the pandemic, like, I paid out $1.5 million to artists. Like, the artists who worked with us got fucking paid, and many of them were able to make their rent. Some of them weren't. It was difficult. It was really, really tough. And some of my artists who depend on in-person events, they were really, really negatively affected by this. But we hustled hard, and we survived it, and we're still here, and we're growing, and we're expanding. And I'm just thankful that we're still open, because this is a tough business to make it in. It really is. That's why, especially if you don't come from money, right? Especially if you aren't a rich kid. It's a really difficult business. Yeah, I'm just glad that we're still here.
Thanks to Ken for sitting down with us for this episode. We will put down the many relevant links to his multiple projects in the description so that you can closely follow all current and forthcoming events. That is it from us today. We will be back with you guys real soon. Till then, take care of yourselves and each other.